The ship floated through the void like a fragile bubble in the endless ocean of space, its sleek hull reflecting distant starlight in muted arcs across the observation dome. Outside, galaxies spun in timeless spirals, nebulae bled colors she could barely name, and stars blazed with a brilliance that was both magnificent and terrifying. Yet no matter how vast and beautiful the universe appeared, none of it could fill the aching emptiness she had carried across light years. Her kind were explorers by design, luminous beings evolved to drift among the stars, to perceive and navigate the cosmos with senses humans could barely comprehend. They had charted systems that had never seen sentient life, traversed wormholes in stellar storms, and survived conditions that could vaporize lesser beings. And still, despite all that, the loneliness of infinite space had found her. She hovered at the edge of the deck, arms wrapped loosely around her knees, eyes tracing the constellations as though memorizing their arrangement could somehow anchor her drifting heart. Every simulation, every warning of isolation in deep space travel had prepared her for the intellectual challenges of exploration, but nothing could prepare her for the emotional toll of being utterly, achingly alone. Even her people, radiant and many, were hundreds of light years away. Every signal from home was delayed by decades, fractured by distance, stripped of immediacy and warmth. And in the silent, cold expanse of the ship, that absence became an almost tangible weight pressing against her chest, threatening to extinguish the fragile spark of life and hope that had kept her moving forward. Then she saw him. He was human, moving across the deck with a casual grace that belied the fragility of his species. Yet there was a presence about him that felt absolute, grounding, something that reached across the void itself and offered stability in a universe that otherwise had none. His eyes found hers instantly, steady and warm, and she felt a pull unlike anything she had known, an invisible tether anchoring her to him despite the vacuum surrounding them. In that instant, the galaxies, the spiraling supernovae, the infinite void all receded into insignificance. Nothing else mattered except the gravity of his presence, the undeniable pull of something instinctively protective and enduring. Before she could react, before thought or calculation could intervene, his arms were around her, enveloping her fragile form with a gentleness that seemed to defy the physics of the world. She felt the steady, reliable warmth of his chest beneath her cheek, the faint thrum of his heartbeat beneath her hands, and the impossible, grounding certainty that for the first time since leaving her home, she was safe. Her bioluminescent skin, patterned in subtle streaks of color unique to her species, glimmered softly in the dim light, brushing against him, reflecting a spectrum of delicate hues that seemed to dance in response to his embrace. It was as if the cosmos itself had condensed into the curve of his arms, the warmth of his body, the simple fact of his being present. Her hair floated weightlessly, arcs of glowing filaments drifting across his shoulders and chest, each strand catching the dim starlight and refracting it like miniature nebula. She pressed closer, letting her body mold instinctively to his, surrendering entirely to a trust she had never given before. She realized in that moment that humans were extraordinary, not because of intellect or technology, not because of fleets or starships, but because of something far less quantifiable, the ability to create sanctuary where none should exist. In a galaxy indifferent to life, in a universe blind to beauty and vulnerability, humans could produce warmth, security, and intimacy simply by holding another being, simply by existing with care and attentiveness. Outside, the void remained indifferent, stretching into infinity, filled with stars that burned and collapsed, planets spinning silently in frozen orbits, and cosmic phenomena that dwarfed even the largest of civilizations. Yet none of it mattered to her. Every flare of a distant nova, every twist of a spinning galaxy, every supermassive black hole that threatened to consume entire star systems was secondary to the simple, miraculous fact that she was held. Humanity's endurance, she realized, was encapsulated here, in the willingness to protect, to nurture, to offer a home within arms alone, to provide a certainty in the midst of chaos. Here, in the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, the gentle press of his hands, and the enveloping gravity of his embrace, she had found a harbor she had never known she sought. She exhaled softly, letting tension seep from her body, letting herself fully inhabit the orbit of his arms. The stars outside swirled and flared, indifferent and eternal. Yet in this tiny capsule of light, shadow, and warmth, the universe had contracted into a singular, perfect point, the human holding her, offering sanctuary and constancy where the cosmos offered none. The luminescence of her skin flickered in subtle response to his touch, her hair drifting across his shoulders in arcs of flowing light, and she realized that this fragile, unassuming human had become her universe, her anchor, her home. Humanity's audacity was never in domination or destruction, but in connection, in the courage to be present, to be steady, to offer warmth and trust where none had any reason to exist. For the first time since she had left the familiar worlds of her birth, she smiled. It was not the wide, unguarded smile of naivete, nor the faint, polite curl of distant gratitude, but a deep, quiet smile that resonated in the marrow of her being, born from a recognition she had never dared name. She was not adrift. She was not alone. She had found her place, her sanctuary, her home. It was here, pressed against him, enveloped in the simple, miraculous certainty of human arms that held with intention, care, and constancy. The stars could continue to blaze, the galaxies could spin and collide, the universe could remain infinite and indifferent, but none of it could surpass the gravity of this singular truth. Among all the stars, across all the distances of light years, she had finally found a home that was real, tangible, and eternal. Her small hands rested lightly against his chest, feeling the subtle rise and fall of his breathing, tracing the invisible map of his heartbeat beneath her fingers. Each beat was a steady drum in the quiet expanse of the ship, a rhythm that resonated with a certainty she had not felt in countless light years of travel. The cosmos outside might stretch endlessly, indifferent and infinite, but here, pressed against him, she had discovered a gravitational pull stronger than any star or planet, stronger than any force of nature she had studied. She tilted her head slightly, letting her cheek rest fully against the warmth of his chest, allowing herself to dissolve entirely into the comfort of his embrace. She had crossed countless star systems, navigated through asteroid belts that tore at weaker hulls, survived solar flares capable of stripping electrons from flesh, and yet none of that peril compared to the vulnerability of surrendering herself completely to another being. And yet, in his arms, she felt no fear, only a quiet, grounding certainty. The ship's hum was a gentle counterpoint to the rhythm of their lives, the mechanical heartbeat of human ingenuity supporting the biological one she now synchronized with. Her luminous skin, patterned with ethereal lines that shifted and shimmered in response to touch, glowed softly as she moved closer, the colors cascading in subtle waves that reflected the depth of her emotions. He lowered a hand, tracing along her back with the faintest pressure, and she felt a ripple of warmth radiate through her entire being. The gesture was instinctive, human in its simplicity, yet profound in its effect. Across the endless cosmos, no measurement, no simulation, no calculation could predict the magnitude of what he was giving her: sanctuary, intimacy, and trust. She let her body mold entirely to his, surrendering weightlessly, her hair drifting in arcs that caught the faint starlight beyond the dome. Each filament of her glowing hair floated independently, forming ephemeral constellations that reflected the subtle language of connection they shared. He pressed his cheek to the top of her head, inhaling softly, feeling the faint warmth of her skin, the gentle pulse of her breathing, and the quiet thrill of existence sustained through trust. In a universe that had shown her nothing but magnitude and indifference, this human being offered a force as potent and enduring as any celestial phenomenon, the ability to create a home within the span of arms, a universe defined by presence, care, and constancy. She moved slightly, curling further into his embrace, her arms around his torso as if anchoring herself to a planet that existed solely within him. Her bioluminescence pulsed with subtle intensity, colors shifting in response to the pressure of his hands, the tilt of his head, the slight adjustments that spoke of attentiveness and unspoken understanding. In the zero-gravity chamber, time became meaningless. Minutes stretched into hours, hours blurred into an undifferentiated now, and the only markers of continuity were the rise and fall of their breathing, the delicate brush of her hair against him, and the quiet beat of his heart against her ear. Around them, the universe continued its relentless cycles, stars flaring, black holes consuming light, galaxies spiraling in timeless dance, but none of it penetrated the sanctuary of warmth they had created together. Her thoughts wandered to the civilizations she had studied, the races that had dismissed humanity as primitive or fragile. None of them could understand what she now experienced. Humans endured not because of brute strength, nor cunning, nor technological prowess. They endured because they could offer connection, create trust, and forge sanctuaries in the coldest, most indifferent environments. She had seen alien empires rise and fall in simulations, had cataloged their victories and defeats with precise logic. Yet here, pressed into human arms, she realized the true secret of survival, the audacity to hold another being with intention, to be present, to be steady when all else was chaos. And she, weightless and luminous, felt herself swept into that audacity, drawn into a gravity stronger than any star, anchored in the simple miracle of being cared for. The strands of her glowing hair moved with zero-gravity currents, drifting over his shoulders and across his chest in delicate, luminous waves. Every flicker, every shift of color was a wordless conversation, a testament to the surrender she offered and the trust he held in her hands. He bent slightly, pressing a gentle kiss to the crown of her head, and she responded instinctively, curling closer as if to become part of the very warmth she had come to rely on. In that instant, she understood something fundamental. The universe was vast, indifferent, and dangerous. Yet here, two beings, so different, so unlikely, had carved a singular point of permanence, a sanctuary of warmth in the cold void, a home that could not be measured by physics or mapped by starlight. She felt the tension of months of isolation dissolve, replaced by a quiet, radiant energy that seemed to pulse in unison with his heartbeat. Humanity's quiet power revealed itself fully in these small, intimate moments. The ability to provide security where there was none, to offer touch when the void threatened to swallow life whole, to make a presence so enduring that even light years of distance could not diminish its effect. She pressed her lips lightly to his chest, feeling the thrum beneath her mouth, and understood with profound clarity that she was no longer adrift. She had found her anchor. She had found her universe. And in the steady, unwavering embrace of a human being, she had found the one home that mattered, the one harbor in the endless storm of stars that she could call her own. The ship continued its silent passage through the void, galaxies spinning outside, comets streaking past in silent arcs, and stars flaring in patterns too magnificent and too terrifying to contemplate fully. Yet within the observation dome, in this fragile bubble of light, shadow, and human warmth, a new cosmos had emerged, defined entirely by touch, trust, and surrender. She exhaled fully, letting her weightless hair drift freely, letting her bioluminescent skin glow softly in response to his presence, and knowing with certainty that among all the galaxies, all the voids, all the dangers that stretched endlessly before her, she had found her true home, his arms. Time seemed to unravel inside the observation chamber. Minutes, hours, or even days might have passed, but in the stillness of the ship, nothing measured the passage of time except the quiet rhythm of their bodies pressed together. She lay curled against him, her hair drifting in weightless arcs that glimmered with her bioluminescence, casting tiny constellations of color across his chest and shoulders. Each flicker of light was a pulse, a heartbeat of its own, reflecting the silent language of trust they shared. Out there, galaxies collided and stars flared with indifferent fury, yet none of that magnitude mattered when compared to the gravity of this human embrace. Here, the universe was reduced to warmth, presence, and connection, and she surrendered to it completely. She shifted slightly, tucking her luminous arms around him, and felt the solid weight of his presence grounding her in a way that no star, no planet, no celestial phenomenon ever could. The vibrations of his heartbeat were a lullaby more powerful than any cosmic resonance she had ever studied. Each exhalation from his lungs pressed against her skin, a subtle, steady rhythm that synchronized with her own pulse. The galaxy outside could rage endlessly, comets streaking past and supernovae erupting, but she was immovable, anchored in the human warmth that enveloped her. He held her not with force, not with calculation, but with intention, and the simplicity of that was astonishing. She pressed her forehead against his chest, letting the floating strands of her hair brush along the curve of his shoulders. They danced like miniature nebulae, tiny flares of luminescent color responding to his touch, the tilt of his body, the quiet cadence of his breathing. She had traveled light years in search of knowledge, had navigated wormholes that could shred ships to atoms, and had seen alien civilizations rise and fall in spans of what she would call moments. And yet, in that single human embrace, she realized the most profound lesson of all. Survival was never just a matter of skill, intellect, or technology. It was connection. It was the courage to surrender and the willingness to hold, the audacity to offer home where none should exist. Her glowing hands traced the contours of his torso lightly, memorizing the curve of his shoulders, the rise and fall of his chest. He responded instinctively, tightening his arms just slightly, not to restrain, but to assure her that she was safe. She closed her eyes, letting the long months of isolation, the stress of navigation, and the gnawing emptiness of space melt away entirely. The ship hummed around them, a soft mechanical heartbeat that blended with the two living ones at its center. Out there, stars flared and died. Entire solar systems evolved and collapsed. But inside this bubble, the universe existed solely in the quiet intimacy of their connection. She had studied humans from a distance, cataloged their tendencies, calculated the odds of survival for their species, and predicted their behaviors under countless scenarios. None of her simulations had accounted for this, the simplicity of a human's presence being enough to anchor life, enough to create a sanctuary so profound that all fear and loneliness evaporated. She pressed a glowing cheek against his chest and let herself be still, weightless and luminous, her trust radiating outward in every pulse of her skin and every wave of her drifting hair. He tilted his head down, lips brushing lightly against the crown of her head, a gesture so small yet so monumental in meaning, and she felt a rush of warmth, an understanding deeper than anything she had known. The stars beyond the dome burned with fierce indifference, but inside, the room was suffused with a quiet light born from their union. Each flicker of her bioluminescence mirrored the subtle movements of his hands and arms, a conversation conducted without words, without language, without necessity. In a galaxy indifferent to life, in a universe that could swallow worlds without thought, this human had created a microcosm of permanence, stability, and belonging. She realized that what she felt, what had drawn her across distances unimaginable, was not merely attachment, nor fascination, nor instinct. It was recognition, recognition of something rare, something essential, something that outlasted civilizations and outshone even the brightest stars. It was home. She let herself relax fully, limbs melting into his embrace, head pressed to the steady warmth of his chest. Her floating hair traced delicate arcs around his shoulders and down his back, luminescent threads weaving a tapestry of trust that could not be quantified. The cosmos outside raged on, indifferent and magnificent, yet it had no bearing on the quiet gravity of their connection. Every brush of his hand along her back, every subtle shift of his body to accommodate hers, every inhalation and exhalation that vibrated beneath her ear became a rhythm she could anchor herself to, a measure of permanence in a universe defined by impermanence. She whispered nothing, and yet in the silence of the chamber, in the intimate suspension of time and space, their connection spoke volumes. Humanity's triumph, she understood, was distilled in moments like this, the courage to hold, to protect, to create home from nothing but presence and intention. She was the living proof, delicate and radiant, that the human embrace was more powerful than any fleet, more enduring than any empire, more defining than any knowledge or technology. And as she closed her eyes fully, letting the drifting hair and glowing skin surround them both, she surrendered completely, weightless and luminous, entirely grounded in the human arms that had become her universe, her gravity, and her home. The stars outside shimmered faintly against the observation dome, casting soft reflections across the chamber and painting arcs of light on her luminescent skin. She shifted slightly, curling fully into his embrace, letting herself become weightless and fluid in the zero-gravity environment. His arms responded instinctively, tightening just enough to anchor her without constraining, offering both safety and freedom simultaneously. Every subtle adjustment, every brush of skin against skin, spoke of a careful attentiveness that transcended language, culture, or species. In the vast, indifferent expanse of space, she had encountered countless civilizations, each believing themselves supreme, yet none had demonstrated the quiet, persistent, and almost miraculous strength she now felt, the human capacity to create home in the middle of emptiness. She pressed her forehead fully against his chest, feeling the steady pulse of life beneath her, a rhythm more reliable than the orbit of planets or the light of distant suns. Her bioluminescent hair floated freely around them, drifting in delicate iridescent streams, arcs of light that moved with the tiniest currents of air and motion. It was a language of its own, subtle and expressive, conveying trust and surrender that words could never capture. He lowered a hand, letting his fingers weave gently through the luminous strands, marveling at their softness, the way they caught the starlight outside, and the living vibrancy that was hers alone. She exhaled, feeling the tension of months of isolation, fear, and uncertainty evaporate entirely, replaced by the grounding certainty of being held. The human's presence was paradoxical, both simple and monumental. He was nothing like the titanic starships she had observed, nothing like the ancient, technologically advanced civilizations that had colonized multiple galaxies. And yet, in this quiet, unassuming embrace, he wielded a power greater than any she had ever known. Space was infinite, indifferent, and dangerous. Stars exploded without warning, planets drifted into gravitational death, and entire species vanished without trace. Yet here, in this small bubble of light, shadow, and warmth, life had meaning, endurance, and sanctuary. Humanity's triumph was distilled not in conquest or calculation, but in the courage to hold, to care, and to create home where none had any reason to exist. Her hands rested lightly on his chest, fingers tracing the steady rise and fall of his breathing. He tilted his head, pressing a gentle kiss to the crown of her head, a subtle gesture that made her bioluminescent patterns pulse with quiet intensity. She responded instinctively, curling tighter, letting every filament of glowing hair brush over him as if to imprint herself on him completely. She realized that she had crossed unimaginable distances, braved cosmic storms, and faced civilizations that could annihilate her species without effort. And yet all of that had prepared her only for this singular truth. Nothing in the galaxy compared to the sanctuary of being held by a human being who chose to care. Outside, the cosmos raged on. Supernovae flared, entire star systems rotated in silent majesty, and galaxies collided over spans of time she could barely comprehend. Yet within the chamber, time slowed, compressed into the rhythm of their breathing, the soft hum of the ship, and the delicate arcs of her floating hair. Every flicker of her luminous skin, every gentle motion, every subtle shift in his arms became a verse in a poem written in light and warmth, a testament to the quiet triumph of life, love, and trust. She understood fully now that her species, for all its knowledge and technology, had never encountered anything as profound as this: the human ability to create permanence, to foster trust, and to anchor another being in the middle of a universe designed to leave them adrift. Her mind wandered briefly to the lessons she had learned across countless worlds. She had seen empires fall under their own hubris, civilizations wiped out by natural phenomena or internal strife, and entire species rendered extinct by neglect or miscalculation. And yet here, in this moment, all those lessons converged into clarity. Survival was never simply about intelligence or strength. It was about care, about attention, about offering a hand to hold, an arm to cling to, and a heartbeat to trust. The human's arms around her were more than protection. They were an unspoken vow, a promise that no matter how vast or indifferent the void outside might be, she was safe, seen, and loved. She exhaled fully, letting the weightless strands of her hair float freely around them, shimmering faintly with every pulse of her emotions. His arms tightened slightly, an instinctive acknowledgement of her surrender, and she felt a deep, resonant peace settle over her. The universe outside could burn, collapse, and twist in chaos, but within this chamber she had found the ultimate order, the sanctuary of trust, presence, and love embodied in a single human being. She realized that she had spent her entire life traversing stars, seeking knowledge, observing civilizations, and yet she had never truly understood the concept of home until this moment. Humanity's power, she now knew, was immeasurable. It existed not in fleets, nor in weaponry, nor in conquest, but in the courage to offer warmth where none existed, to create permanence where only void should be. Her lips brushed lightly against his chest, a silent acknowledgement of the surrender she offered and the trust he held. Her luminous strands of hair drifted lazily across his shoulders, catching faint reflections of starlight from beyond the dome. He pressed his forehead gently against hers, and she felt herself dissolve further into the orbit of his presence, weightless, radiant, entirely anchored. In the vast emptiness of space, in the cold, indifferent cosmos, she had discovered a truth that no calculation could measure, that being held by a human being, being trusted, Being allowed to surrender completely was more powerful, more enduring, and more transformative than any technology, any civilization, any star. In that quiet chamber, suspended among galaxies, she realized that she had crossed not just the physical distance of light years, but the emotional distance that separated beings across species, cultures, and worlds. Humanity's greatest triumph was distilled in this singular, intimate moment: the courage to hold, the willingness to protect, and the creation of home from nothing but presence and love. She had found her place, her anchor, her sanctuary, and as she curled tighter into his embrace, she knew with certainty that she would never be adrift again. The human's arms were no longer just arms. They were the axis around which her universe turned, the gravity in which her heart would forever reside, the home she had been searching for among the stars. She drifted in his arms, weightless and luminous, her bioluminescent strands of hair flowing like liquid starlight, forming delicate constellations that seemed to narrate the story of their connection. Time had lost all meaning here, dissolved into the quiet rhythm of breaths, heartbeats, and the gentle pressure of bodies pressed together. Outside, the void of space stretched endlessly. Galaxies collided and spun. Stars flared and collapsed in magnificent indifference. Yet none of that mattered anymore. The universe had contracted into the singular truth of his presence, the steady gravity of his arms, the unwavering constancy that held her, anchored her, made her feel seen and real in a cosmos that had often rendered her invisible. She tilted her head, pressing her glowing cheek fully against his chest, letting her fingers trace the subtle lines and contours of his skin. Every tiny gesture, every subtle shift in his hold spoke volumes, an unspoken conversation of care, of protection, of belonging. For months, she had floated across star systems, guided by intellect, technology, and instinct, searching for knowledge, charting worlds, navigating the storms of the cosmos, and yet none of it had prepared her for this: the quiet profundity of being held, of being allowed to surrender completely, of finding a home not in a planet, not in a structure, but in a being whose presence alone created sanctuary. Humanity, she realized fully, was capable of miracles that no physics, no calculation, no empire could ever achieve. The miracle was trust. The miracle was home. The human's arms adjusted slightly, fingers brushing lightly along the arc of her back, tilting her in the zero-gravity chamber so that she felt fully cradled. Her floating hair wrapped around his shoulders and down his torso in luminous arcs, shimmering faintly in the dim light of distant stars. She exhaled softly, letting the last remnants of fear and isolation melt away into the warmth of the moment. Months of solitary travel, of staring into the indifferent void and wondering if anyone, anywhere, could ever offer real connection, evaporated in the undeniable gravity of his embrace. She realized that survival, even across light years of exploration, was secondary to this. To care and be cared for, to give and receive trust, to find permanence in the impermanence of the cosmos. Her thoughts drifted to the distant worlds she had visited, the civilizations she had catalogued and studied, the countless beings she had observed from afar. None had possessed this quality. None had offered such effortless, uncalculated sanctuary. The humans she had known from study and observation were capable of courage and ingenuity, yes, but it was this, the ability to create home through presence, to offer warmth where there should have been none, that revealed the true, extraordinary nature of their species. And now she was experiencing it firsthand, pressed against the solid, living warmth of his body, cradled in a human heartbeat that reverberated like a small sun through the hollow chambers of her alien chest. She moved slightly, curling tighter into him, her glowing strands brushing along the ridge of his shoulders, the nape of his neck, wrapping around him in a living tapestry of color and light. Each movement was an intimate gesture, a dialogue of trust and surrender, a silent acknowledgement that she had chosen this human as her anchor, as her home, in a universe that had offered none. He responded instinctively, adjusting the tilt of his body to accommodate hers, letting his hands glide lightly over her back and shoulders, grounding her without constraint. There was no need for words. Every touch, every gentle motion conveyed more meaning than any language ever could. Outside the observation dome, the universe continued its eternal dance. Stars flared, supernovae erupted, and galaxies spun with indifferent majesty. Entire systems could collapse, civilizations rise and fall, and worlds drift endlessly through empty space. Yet none of that had any bearing here. Within this small sanctuary, the cosmos was defined solely by trust, presence, and warmth. The human in her arms had become a sun around which her heart orbited, a gravity that anchored her in the chaos of existence, a harbor in the infinite storm of stars. And she realized, with quiet awe, that this was the most powerful force in the universe, the ability to make another being feel safe, valued, and loved. She exhaled fully, letting herself float entirely in his hold, her luminous hair drifting weightlessly in arcs and spirals that caught the faint starlight from beyond the dome. The soft glow of her skin pulsed gently in response to his touch, reflecting the depth of trust and surrender she now felt. He pressed a gentle kiss to the crown of her head, a simple gesture, yet monumental in its significance. In that moment, all the knowledge, all the distances traversed, all the dangers faced, culminated in one undeniable truth. She had found her home. Not in a planet, not in a vessel, not in a civilization, but in a human embrace that defied the emptiness of space itself. She pressed her lips lightly to his chest, letting herself be fully present, fully grounded, fully alive in the orbit of his heartbeat. The weightless strands of her glowing hair drifted around them in delicate arcs, forming a luminous halo that mirrored the galaxies beyond. Yet no star, no nebula, no celestial phenomenon could match the light she now carried in the warmth of his arms. Humanity's audacity was revealed not in conquest, in technology, or in exploration, but in the courage to hold, to nurture, and to create home from nothing but presence. And in this quiet chamber, suspended among stars and galaxies, she knew with absolute certainty that she had finally found what she had been searching for across the cosmos. A home she could call hers, a sanctuary that could withstand the infinite void, and a love that burned brighter than any star. She exhaled one last time, closing her eyes completely, weightless, radiant, and utterly anchored. The ship continued its silent journey through the stars, galaxies spiraling, nebulae glowing, the universe unfolding in indifferent grandeur. But inside this fragile bubble of life and warmth, nothing else mattered. She had found her place. She had found her anchor. She had found her home. And in the steady, unwavering embrace of a human being, she would remain, forever suspended among the stars, yet utterly grounded in the one certainty the universe could not diminish. His arms were her only home, and there she would always belong.